Derek, Michelle, Abbey with Project Recover are dedicated to finding and repatriating, make sure that American military personnel missing in action since World War II. So, CEO Derek, Abbey, and Community and Donor Relations Michelle will share their stories and the how and the why. So, without further ado, come on up.
Well, since I just told Michelle, since they introduced both of us, she has to take half the slideshow. Just gotta think on our feet. So, this is I'm very grateful to be here. It's always a pleasure for us to come into the community, especially right here in Central Oregon, and share the work of Project Recover. It makes us full of pride to share this story with you, and for you to know that this work is happening in your backyard. A little bit about myself, but not too much. Again, my name is Derek Abbey. I spent a career in the Marine Corps. Did everything you possibly want to do in the Marine Corps, it seems like, from being an enlisted communicator to the F-18 community, did everything you possibly want to do in the F-18 except for an actual air-to-air engagement. And then also worked significantly with the Special Operations community when the Marine Corps created their Special Operations arm. So ran around all over the world with what I call the Smurf Ninjas. I've been a part of Project Recover now for 2 decades. Started with the organization just as an initial member when I was still in the F-18 community, grew in the organization as a team leader, ultimately became a board member, and have been in this position for 4 years. But enough about me, let's talk a little bit about the organization. You heard it in the introduction. Our focus is on finding and ultimately repatriating Americans missing in action from our previous wars in order to provide answers for our families that have given the most for our nation. And we'll dive somewhat into the statistics, but a lot of people don't know a lot of the numbers, but there's as many as 5 million Gold Star MIA family members across our nation that have been waiting for answers for decades, and we'll get into some of those stories of what those stories look like. World War II ends, and at the end of it, there was a lot of celebrating like this, and thousands upon thousands of our service members that have been gone for several years fighting war abroad were on their way home. But as many as 100,000 of those service members remained missing in action. People like Horace House, Walter Mintus, and William Pinnell, their families in South Dakota, Pennsylvania, Ohio, were wondering what happened to their loved ones, and they would wait for many years, decades into the future to learn what happened to their loved ones. And when we lose somebody, and we've all dealt with the death of a loved one, and it's tragic, especially tragic to lose somebody in combat. But when somebody is lost and they're missing in action, it's a different type of impact. There's holding on to hope that they have somehow survived. There's no role changes because people want to hold on to that hope with the reality or the misreality that they may somehow return at some point in the future. And that grieving process is interrupted because of that, and that grief is passed from generation to generation to generation. And we've seen that over and over again in interacting with thousands of MIA family members across our nation. Even decades later, there's stories made up within the family about how they might have survived. They were rescued by natives. They're living another life. They don't know, things like that. It's very, very common. There's often an altar in their home where they're waiting to see what happened. It's no difference with these cases. So how did all of this start? Project Recover, that is. So 30 years ago, our founder, Dr. Pat Scannon, was actually on a different mission. He was working in the nation of Palau in the South Pacific, searching for a Japanese trawler that was sunk by a young Navy ensign who was piloting a TBM Avenger, and that ensign's name was George Herbert Walker Bush. So he sunk this trawler. There were rumors at the time that this trawler was an unarmed trawler, but they found it and very quickly realized that it was still armed, just on the bottom of the ocean. But they found this trawler so quickly that Pat and his wife had some time in the nation of Palau to hire a guide. And instead of doing the scuba diving activities that most people do when they go to this country, he hired a guide and said, "Can you take us to some World War II wreckage and sites?" And the guide took him to this wing. And Pat looked at the wing, and obviously something significant happened to this aircraft. And he asked, what happened to the aircraft and what happened to the crew? And the guy didn't have the answer to those questions. And so Pat took it upon himself to start researching possibly finding out what happened to this aircraft, and in the process found out about the hundreds of aircraft and crews that were lost in and around Palau during World War II, and that remained missing. And he started going back on his own to find out more information about these losses and see if he could find the people associated with them, and quickly realized that this might not be the safest work to be doing by yourself. So he created a small group of like-minded individuals that at the time was called the Bent Prop Project, and they started doing one mission a year to Palau, searching the waters and the jungles, searching for these Americans. Most of the time looking for aircraft, but not always looking for the aircraft and the crews, but also prisoners of war sites that where these prisoners were executed and interned. And that was 30 years ago, and today a lot has changed. So it started in this little star here. Many people aren't quite familiar with Palau is, but it's in the South Pacific. 9 major air campaigns took place in Palau, as well as an amphibious landing that the Marines did at Peleliu. Peleliu is an island in Palau. And hundreds were lost and remained missing in that small island. So we would go there once a year to search the jungles and the waters of that country. Using pretty basic and archaic means. You know, we had compass and GPS technology came about. We were very excited about that for searching through the jungle. But using basic scuba and getting online and searching the ocean floor. Again, we were originally called the Bent Prop Project. That changed in 2018 when we became Project Recover. But every single site that we find associated with an MIA, we do a flag ceremony. We fold a flag for that MIA, and we keep that until someday when they are ultimately returned to their families, and we deliver that flag to those families. So why do we do this? Why are we committed to this? Well, the first thing is when every member of our military raises their right hand and swears an oath to the Constitution and dons the cloth of our nation, we collectively make a promise to that individual and their family that should they fall in battle, we'll do everything that we can to return them to their loved ones. And we truly believe that that promise does not have an expiration date. This has an impact on families, but a lot more than that. Those families have obviously given the most. They've lost their loved one, and they've suffered since then and continue to do. But we're also committed to keeping these stories alive and educating the next generation. So we work with students at all levels, from high school, college students, graduate students, postdoc. We're no longer students, but we continue to keep these stories alive, but also advance education around the topic related to history, science, and technology that it takes to accomplish this mission, and much more. And then we're striving to have that healing impact on the individuals, families, and ultimately the nation. And we've seen this over and over and over again. It's pretty intuitive, you know, how these families are impacted when you're providing answers for them, and the healing process can continue. But it also has an impact on our military members, those that are serving side by side and are tasked with bringing their fellow service members home. When somebody is brought home, there's healing that occurs then. And then we've witnessed it over and over again when somebody is returned, that the community naturally forms around them and holds on to them. And that promise is ultimately kept all the way to the national level, in turn building trust, again, with our nation, with hopes of having a positive impact on the future, right? So we want our young citizens to continue to don the cloth of our nation and swear the oath to the Constitution and protect every single one of us. So this is important, not only today, but in the future. So this is some of the examples of some of the students and stuff that we've worked with, and some of the institutions that we've worked with. Some of our primary partners are at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the University of Delaware. In 2012, serendipitously, we met with them. They were working in Palau. We were working in Palau. They were using some very advanced technologies and automated underwater vehicles. And we quickly realized that we had the mission, they had the technology, and if we started working together, we could really start advancing this mission. And that's exactly what we did. We're also working with high school students. We worked with a high school in Michigan for multiple years, where they had built remote operated vehicles in Michigan and then fundraised and traveled to Palau to join us on these missions. The funny thing about this high school is they don't even have a swimming pool in their high school. So they would pull a cow trough from one of the local farms, build a robot, test it in the cow trough before they traveled thousands of miles to put it in the oceans 100 feet below the surface. But absolutely amazing. Some of those students are off doing some incredible things as engineers and other great things. And we've worked with college students from San Diego State University, teaching undergraduate research and working with them on the subjects that they're studying to examine how they could have a positive impact in the community and in the mission of Project Recover. If you ask them across the board the impact that this work has had on them, it's life-changing. They get to go overseas, experience another culture, work with other cultures towards a mission that means something significant, and many times they haven't been exposed to anything like this, or even the history associated with it through the classroom work that they've done. We are a nonprofit, so we are able to accomplish our mission because of the charity of the public and generosity of the public, but we are also an official partner of the Department of Defense. In 2015, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, the official Department of Defense agency that's been tasked with accounting for missing Americans, was able to establish public-private partnerships. Prior to that, we would feed information to them that we would research and find, and then they would make a decision on whether or not to conduct a recovery. But now we're an official partner with them, so they come to us from time to time and ask us to conduct any part of the entire mission set, and we do that in partnership with them. And we also do our unilateral missions at the same time. So I've talked about some of the technology. One of the big things that I mentioned is the use of these automated underwater vehicles that look like that. They look like a little mini torpedo. And what these robots do, one of the big sensors that they utilize is side scan sonar. So they shoot sound out of the side of the robot, it's reflected back, and it creates shadows on the ocean floor in the same way as you can see these camels. The shadow from the camel is created by the light. In this case, it's sound, and we get a return like what you see on the right. Believe it or not, there's an aircraft in that image. It takes a trained eye. It took us a little while, but it's sitting right here. And for the most part, it's not what you would expect. You look at this image, and it's not a pretty airplane sitting on the bottom. It's oftentimes a crumbled mess because it was a devastating impact for these aircraft. And so we search these images, and instead of getting online and scuba diving, now we can look for points of interest or anomalies on the ocean floor, dive those points, determine are they man-made. If they are they aircraft? If it's an aircraft, is it the aircraft that we're looking for? And then is it ultimately the point associated with those missing in action? It's a lot safer, and it's allowed us to significantly advance our mission over the years. That's the remote operated vehicle that I mentioned that the high school students made. That's their first version of it. That's actually not an MIA site. We were actually testing it. This is a Japanese Jake. But they got it across the country multiple times, or across the world multiple times, and were able to participate and contribute to this mission. So I mentioned Palau. So 2012, we meet with Scripps and the University of Delaware. We start this partnership. It really advances our capabilities. It brings about additional success. Additional success brings additional attention, and with that, additional resources. And we've really been able to scale our mission across the world. So we're no longer only working one mission a year in the nation of Palau. We've been to 21 different countries around the world. We do multiple missions a year, every year. So I just came back 2 weeks ago from Palau, actually, where we did an underwater recovery mission, where we did recover the remains of a sailor that had been missing for close to 80 years. And then we did another week in the jungle on a site that we've located, but we need to locate the pilot itself of this aircraft. Funny thing about that story, this jungle, is a Marine Corsair, and the Marine is actually a Marine of the squadron that I used to serve in. So it's kind of this connection across time. And my beginnings with the organization started when I was part of that squadron. I met Pat Scannon, our founder, at 121 Reunion, which is the squadron that I was in. So it's kind of serendipitous how the mission continues to move forward. So what's next? Technology continues to grow. It's absolutely amazing. I showed you that image of the side scan sonar. That is an image from about 10 years ago. And at the time, we could do about 20 square kilometers in a 4-week period, and that was about a 1-meter resolution. Today, we can do about 100 square kilometers in a 4-week mission, and the resolution is down to a centimeter. So last year, I was in Maine. We were right off of Kennebunkport looking for a naval aircraft that had crashed there. And the imagery was so good, we could see the lobster traps on the ocean floor and then the lines holding them to the surface. So this work has this kind of ripple effect, snowball effect. So now we're using the same technology to help the fishing industry and the environment find lost lobster and crab traps, because they're lost, but they still work. So They lose the trap, lobster goes in, eats the bait, dies. More lobsters go in, eat the lobsters, die, and it just keeps on going over and over. So thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of sea life are lost every year in these traps that are just sitting on the ocean floor. So we're helping with the recovery of that to help not only the fishing industry, but also the environment in general. Drones, we're working with some stuff on land. Believe it or not, the underwater technology is advancing a lot more quickly than the land technology. So today, some of the best technology I have in the jungle is boots, a machete, and a GPS. Sometimes the GPS works. Most of the time, my boots and my machete work. But we're working with drones and putting different sensor suites, like the one you can see in the upper right, to examine and search jungle environments. We still have a lot of work, but we're working on that as well. We've expanded our mission set to recovery. So now we are doing recovery on land and in water. We're the only nonprofit organization that's fully vertical in the sense that we do historical research, search missions, documentation missions, and recovery missions in both the underwater environment and the land environment. So some advancements in that technology in the underwater environment. When I started this, 100 feet was about as deep as we would go. Well, we've located sites now below 1,000 feet, and we've conducted recoveries below 200 feet. And we're working with the Navy Experimental Dive Unit, who just did a recovery for us in Papua New Guinea. They have the theoretical capability to go down to 1,000 feet. So we're continuing to expand that environment. And so as we do that, it gives us more and more search area. We're adding machine learning, so we don't have to burn our eyeballs out on reviewing that side scan sonar imagery. And we're bringing on new, more capable members. Pat, our founder, and I always joke that because we interviewed some amazing people that want to contribute their time and expertise to this mission, and we joke that we don't think we'd make the cut anymore. So thank goodness we got in when we did. We still work with high school students. This was the most recent team from that high school I mentioned in Stockbridge, Michigan. One thing that was really neat about this team is it was all female engineers that we're sending out to the field. So some pretty amazing things have happened over the year, and they continue to grow. A couple quick stories. This is Casey. You saw his image. We had just got out of the mangrove jungle, and that's about what you look like when you come out. You're just looking to sit down and drink as much water as you can because it's just a very tough environment to work in. But the interesting thing about Casey is the grandson of Jimmy Doyle. And Jimmy Doyle was an Army Air Corps member from World War II. He was on B-24. We located his B-24 and ultimately helped with the repatriation of Jimmy Doyle, his grandfather. And so Casey came forward and said, "You've done so much for my family, how can I pay this forward?" Well, he's now a member of the organization and putting his time in the field when he can. And now we have multiple members of former MIA families that we've located their loved one, and they're contributing to the mission to continue to give back. That's the B-24, the plane that his grandfather was on, and actually that the flags on the right is from the ceremony in Arlington National Cemetery where that entire crew was recognized. Not only did they have full military honors in the ceremony in Arlington National Cemetery, but since they were lost in Palau, the president of Palau traveled to the United States, as well as the high chief. They have a parallel tribal system and political system in Palau to show their respects to these families for the sacrifice made by their loved ones. And if you ask the Palauans, they'll fully admit that they owe their country, that them having their country back to these American service members. So I told you that the side scan sonar image, I kind of already gave it away, but there it is right there. One thing that's interesting about this aircraft is sometimes we find things that we're not looking for. So we found this aircraft, it's about 120-something feet deep. We went down and looked at it, and we saw the propellers, and we're like, well, that doesn't quite look right. What is this? Well, we had to do a lot of research to figure it out, and it turns out that it's a Japanese norm. So it was a seaplane that the Japanese had built. When we started researching it more, we realized that they only made 9 operational aircraft. And when we found this one, it was the only one in existence.
Wow.
So that was a pretty amazing thing just for the historical significance of it. But then a couple years later, we found a second one in Chuk. So there's only 2 in existence, and somehow we found both of them. And it just happened to be kind of really a lot of luck. But it has that spooky black coral growing off of it, but kind of cool. You can still see the machine gun in the back seat sticking up, and it's resting where it lies in about 120 feet of water. So We do a lot of aviation work. It's a lot easier to find a missing aircraft associated with missing Americans than it is to find necessarily individuals. But we are also looking for others that are missing, specifically prisoners of war, because we can usually find potentially where they were executed. And in this case, in the history of the Navy SEALs and the UDT teams, there's only 3 that haven't been accounted for. They were captured off the island of Yap, ultimately transported to Palau, where they were unfortunately executed. And so we're working to narrow down their execution site, hopefully bring that home at some point. So we always have these moments, you know, like everything, things like this can become work. But we learn everything that we can about those that we're looking for. We talk about them every single day. We refer to them by name. But then every once in a while, you'll find something that just really drives that point home that you're looking for human beings. And there are long stories about this and people waiting for these answers. And sometimes, you know, you'll find aluminum, and most of the time over the years, the aluminum's bleached, but you'll flip over a piece of aluminum in the jungle, and on the other side is the blue paint that tells you that this is an American aircraft. No matter what, you know, whenever we find an aviation site, at some point everybody touches the propeller, because that's what was driving them through the air before ultimately the end approached. And then things like this. So this was from an Avenger site, and within the crash site was a spoon with USN carved into it, United States Navy. And so when I was in the Marine Corps, I always kept a spoon in my pocket, especially when I was deployed, because if I had an opportunity to eat, I wanted to make sure I had a utensil to utilize, and because sometimes those opportunities were fleeting. And so this is definitely one that hits home for me. And I just thought about that sailor. He had just either left the galley or was going to hit the galley once he got back to the ship, and unfortunately he didn't make it back to the ship. When we found this site, a recovery effort was done, but we weren't able to find remains there. But one thing that we did find was the dog tag of Paul Binsman. Of course, we had our flag ceremony. The family received the dog tag, and although they didn't have his remains, they had a full ceremony in Alton, Illinois, because now they knew what happened to their loved one. And Pat and I attended the ceremony, and we weren't really sure what to expect, but they ended up having it at his high school that he went to school, and the entire town came out. And it was as if he had completely returned home, but it was just his one dog tag. But every single one of these ceremonies is special in their own way, whether it's Arlington National Cemetery or Alton, Illinois, or Portage, Pennsylvania, or anything in between. They're all special, and it's very incredible to witness what happens when somebody's brought home. This is actually an image from a little over 2 weeks ago. So we were conducting that recovery, and again, you never know what you're going to pull up. And from the site, we pulled up a nickel from 1941. And you just have to wonder whose nickel was this. There were 3 on the crew, and it belonged to one of them. They had it in their flight suit or their pocket when they went down. So there's always little things like this, to include this one from just a couple weeks ago. I've already mentioned the support of our host nations, but this is actually not an American newspaper. This is a Palauan newspaper. So when a service member is brought home, typically either Hawaii or Nebraska, potentially Delaware, there's a ramp ceremony there that they have to acknowledge. But when we found this service member, the Palauans demanded that we have a ramp ceremony in Palau. And the DoD members that were there actually didn't even have their uniforms, so they had to have their uniforms shipped out to them so they could conduct the ramp ceremony. And it was attended by the president, all of the political leaders and the tribal leaders and citizens, for them to show their respects for the sacrifice of this service member. So I already mentioned Ora Shardinghouse, Walter Ventus, and William Pinnell. And I mentioned that for a reason, because these are success stories, and this is what success looks like for us. Whether it's the sister receiving that flag that we folded for them on the site, or children let out of school lining the streets as they pass by, holding their hands over their hearts and waving flags, or that caisson in Arlington National Cemetery. We do this for the families, and it truly, truly makes a difference. Like I said, 5 million families suffering in silence. It has a positive impact not only on their mental health, but again, all the way up to the national level, and it's just the right thing to do. So a few numbers. We've conducted more than 70 missions around the world. I've already mentioned how many countries we've worked in. We have documented more than 70 aircraft, and of those aircraft that we've located and documented, they're associated with about 300 missing Americans. Of that 300, 70 have been declared buried at sea by the United States Navy. They're part of the USS Abner Reed crew. So Navy tradition, if they assume that they will not be disturbed, they'll let them rest where they lie. The families know where they're at, but they're going to stay there unless, in some case in the future, they'll be disturbed. 17 have been repatriated, and of the remaining cases, they're in some sort of open status, meaning we've recovered their remains, they're going through the identification process now, or a recovery effort needs to take place. The good thing is these numbers continue to change in a positive way. Seems like every single day. Literally today, I had a team leaving Hawaii. They're on their way to the Marshall Islands to conduct a recovery on a site there. It's an underwater recovery site, or underwater recovery mission. And then we're going to continue to do missions throughout the year and for years to come. So there's all sorts of ways to learn more about Project Recover. If you like movies, there was a full-length documentary done on our work called To What Remains. You can find it on all the streaming platforms, to include, I think you can find it on YouTube for free now, but you can find it on Amazon, Google Play, Apple TV, all those. They did a beautiful job. It was done by Imperative Entertainment, the same people that are releasing Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese's next film. It was kind of funny because we received an award from the GI Film Festival the same day they were announcing that movie in Cannes Film Festival. And I sent a message to the studio, and they actually responded and were like, yeah, we're actually very happy about this. I thought they'd be a little bit busy, but they did a beautiful job. And, documentaries are not money makers, but they thought the story was so important. They spent 6 years documenting it, and they did a beautiful job. And they got the entire story arc as far as finding the site, and then all the way to their return to their loved ones. And that's the thing that we're most happy about, is that they captured what this means to families and communities. We've done a lot of stuff local. This is very special for me. I went to Oregon State, and so we had an event at the Cascade campus here a few months ago, and it was very special and a great time to engage with the local community. This is the Heaven Can Wait crew, and that actually, some of them have been recovered. They're going through the identification process now. That was the deep underwater recovery that I mentioned. But what can you do? Spread the word. That's the biggest thing. We are a nonprofit, citizen-led charity, so any resources that can be provided are very, very valuable to us, and we are very efficient with the resources that we receive. But we want to hear from people, and we want to hear from all sorts of people. If you have an MIA family member in your, or if you have an MIA in your family, we want to hear from you. You never know what information might be in a trunk or in a story that you've heard that could ultimately help us solve the puzzle. We're a volunteer-based organization, so if you know somebody or you are somebody that has the ability to contribute, we want to hear from you. And of course, not everybody can go to the jungle or dive the waters around the world, but everybody can support from their couch, and every single bit helps, so any donations help our organization significantly. If you're a social media person, we're on all the platforms. I can't say Twitter too much. I guess I need to change that to whatever it's called now. But we're definitely on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So if you're in those platforms, please let us know. But the one thing that we're most proud of really is Michelle and I are right here in Central Oregon. And if you have somebody that you think that would enjoy this story, or would like to see the film, or talk to us more about the work of Project Recover, we would love to do that. Like I said, it's always special to share the story right here in our own home. So that's what I got for you today, and I'd love to field any questions that you might have, but ultimately, thank you for having us. Sir.
Yeah. What's the age range as far as, then we go back to World War II, I assume? Recently, too? I mean,
yeah, great question. So most of our work is World War II, and I actually meant to touch on the statistic, but I missed it. So there's more than 81,000 Americans still missing in action. And when people hear about POWs and MIAs, most of the time they immediately think about Vietnam. And that's mostly because of the media and stuff. But the number breakdown is 72,000 of them are from World War II, about 7,000 from Korea, and now because of the incredible work that has been done in Southeast Asia, there's less than 1,600 that are still missing from Vietnam.
Wow.
Most of our work has been related to World War II just because of the sheer numbers, but we have been to Vietnam. We were one of the first nonprofit organizations that the Department of Defense asked to come in. We've been doing a lot of water work for them around, and not our most recent repatriation, because we had one in July and we'll have one next month, but prior to that was Paul Abbey's, and Paul Abbey's is buried in Springfield, Oregon. He was a navigator on B-52. that we located and recovered his remains. And he's right over the pass in Springfield. So, and we've actually worked all the way up to Desert Storm. So we've done a mission in Kuwait for an A6 crew that was lost in the water there. But just because of the sheer numbers, most of our work drives us towards World War II missions.
Is that because we do a better job now in recovering people?
We definitely do, yes. So yeah, the numbers have trailed off because the technology and things today have resulted in fewer people being missing. So for the OIF, OEF, and more recent conflicts, there's only a handful of people that are missing, and they are contractors, not necessarily DoD service members. Now, one thing that we do that the Department of Defense actually doesn't even do is we also search for training losses. So DPAA, their charter restricts them to people that are missing in action, and the inaction piece is the most important part of that. So if it's not associated with a conflict directly, those service members might not be designated missing in action, but obviously they're just as missing to their family and loved ones as somebody that was lost in combat. And so there's as many as 20,000 that are missing in action, and they are off of our shores and our oceans, they're in our Great Lakes, they're in our mountains. And so we do work on those cases as well, which is what I was doing in Maine last year. They're more difficult to research, but it's still part of our effort.
It sure seems like DoD has a lot of technology that they could lend to you guys to help. Am I wrong?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes we have, believe it or not, like our underwater capability is pretty significant when it comes to searching, and it's right up there, if not beyond some of the stuff that the DoD is using. The Department of Defense, like and this might come as a surprise to some, but it's a large bureaucratic organization that doesn't always work efficiently. And so they need help. And the good thing is they acknowledge that they need assistance from agile organizations like us. And so like the VA, so I'm a veteran, the VA does what they do, but then we have a number of nonprofits out across our community that really supplement that mission, and it's the same thing that we do with the Department of Defense. Other questions? Sir?
If, I guess two quick questions. If you find a plane that belongs to another country, do you relay that
Great
information
question.
to the other country? And then have you ever found something down there like a UFO?
Or Amelia Earhart.
All right. It always comes up. So we find stuff that we're not looking for all the time. So we have found several aircraft from other nations. And I'll start there. We found several aircraft from other nations, and we document them. We don't document them as thoroughly as we do an MIA aircraft, but we document them. And then we turn all that information over to that nation, typically through the State Department. And then we find a lot of other things that we're not looking for. No UFOs yet, and we haven't found Amelia Earhart yet. But we have found ancient sites. We found all sorts of ancient sites. We find ships on a regular basis. Interesting thing is we found 5 B-24s pretty close together last year, which was probably the biggest underwater MIA find ever. And what we haven't advertised is we also found a Roman ship at the same time. So and it's kind of funny because we work with archaeologists, and all the different archaeologists have different specialties. And so we'll be in the Jungle Lake. We found this really cool ancient altar one time, and like, oh, that's cool, and our archaeologists are like, oh my goodness, and we're like, is there aluminum? No, all right, let's keep going, no. And I kind of joke, but we do document it. Of course, we turn it over because we have to work with the host nation. We won't be able to do this without the support of a host nation, so we turn all that information over to their historical preservation office, and they document it all. And so Amelia Earhart question comes up all the time. I don't think we'll ever find her. I think she was lost in deep water. I mean, I know every once in a while, it seems like every year or so, a photo comes out, and if you cross your eyes and you stand on one foot and you blink 3 times, it looks like something. But no, we haven't found her. But that would be a huge discovery. We do have a case, though. This is an interesting one that we're trying to collect resources for. So there was a transport aircraft lost off the coast of Africa. Had 22 people on it, 22 service members on it. 18 of them were female soldiers. So half of the female MIAs are on one aircraft. And we have really, really good information to go find that site, and I'm confident that we can find it and actually recover the entire crew or all the passengers from that aircraft. The challenge is it's in not very safe environment, so it's gonna take quite a bit to get over there. A lot of pirating and everything going on over there, and so we're examining that. But I've taken all of those service members and mapped them over the United States, and they cover the entire nation, like both coasts, right down the middle of the nation. So it would be, no MIA is worth more than another, but sometimes the stories make a difference, and of course our hope is that it would lead to more and more being recovered. Any questions?
I was going to say, we've been to Palau twice.
Oh wow! All right.
And we spent a week on a billboard in most of Palau, or a lot of Palau.
Nice.
We went to Peleliu, and
Yeah.
my wife actually did the land tour while we were doing the diving, because yours was regular.
Oh, yeah.
The history was just
Yeah.
incredible. And we've been to Chuk. We went to
Oh, wow.
Truck Lagoon and did a liveaboard there, and it was like 10 or 12 different ships and some big bombers, and
Yeah.
it was incredible. But in the history, it was just unreal. Her uncle was killed in World War II in the Philippines. He was on a hell ship. And several years ago, they contacted her cousins to get DNA samples, thinking that possibly they found remains, but nothing ever came back.
Yeah, and there's some difficult cases that it was a good sign that they actually reached out, because usually if the Department of Defense is reaching out, they have some sort of information,
Yeah.
and they're trying to narrow it down. But for those of you that don't know the hell ship stories, those were prisoners of war that were captured by the Japanese, and then they transported them on these ships. And many times we Allies didn't know that there were Americans or Allies on these ships, and would bomb and strafe them, and unfortunately some of them. So terrible outcome. But difficult to, one, find those sites, but also the records and stuff associated with them, because the Japanese weren't very forthcoming back then as far as what they were doing with their prisoners. And other cases where, ship-to-shore movement like Peleliu or other amphibious landings, aircraft records are very well kept, but the ship-to-shore movement records are not. So we have found landing craft. We know that there's service members on them. Who are they? And we just can't narrow it down. And you have to get somewhat close before you start kind of doing DNA analysis and things like that. So, yeah, it's some of the complexities of this work. But speaking of Chuk, we were the first people to find an American aircraft in Chuk, and we found 3 or 4 so far.
Well, they didn't lose very many.
No.
It didn't sound like it.
Yeah.
Operation Hellstorm. It was an incredible.
Yeah.
It was really neat, because on the liveaboard we were on, they would show you a video of where it was during the war, when it was during the attack.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would give you a video swimming through the craft. And then they'd lead you. They'd actually show you pictures in each hole, what to look for. There were some of them had like airplane parts, airplanes inside of them. There was all kinds of ammunition. There was torpedoes. One of them was like a submarine tender, and yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah.
One of them had like bones still in the engine room where it exploded, and you go inside, you're going up through the stairways, and it was amazing.
For aviation enthusiasts, sometimes they get a little freaked out, because when we do a recovery mission, we're going for the people.
Yeah.
And we tear the aircraft apart to get to the people. And so there's people that restore these aircraft that care a lot about them, and they kind of cringe. And for us, it's not about the aircraft. The aircraft are means to the people. But you saw that image of the Corsair in the very beginning. It's actually not an MIA Corsair, the most pristine Corsair I've ever seen. And when we found it, the pilot was actually still alive.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So he's since passed, but very pristine, beautiful aircraft. I know we're probably closing up, and I don't want to
A lot of good
get in
stories.
trouble.
I think you guys have some stuff up here to maybe check out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So find out some more information, and then we have a little parting gift for you. These are just some of our Kiwanis
Thank you so
Western
much.
Juniper
You
flowers.
should be in front of
Beautiful.
You should be in front of
Yes.
Picture?
All right. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I love your presentation. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, we will go ahead and adjourn and see you all next week.